This video is sponsored by Ridge and their wallet and key case. The next update for your wallet and keys is here, and you can get 10% off your order by using offer code SKILLUP. Click the link below to get to it, or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Resident Evil 4 Remake is one of the best games I've played in my life, and like most games I really love, I don't quite know how to properly review it, so I'm just going to talk for a bit, okay? Okay. I played the original on the GameCube back in the day, but I played it at a time when I wasn't really accepting new games, so to speak. The original dropped about 6 weeks after the launch of World of Warcraft, a game to which I would be hopelessly addicted for about the next decade. I'm like a drunk with all those blackout spots in my memory when it comes to video games, and Resident Evil 4 was literally the first casualty of that condition. I know I finished it. I remember bits of it like the lake boss and the castle and Ramon and Ashley being fucking annoying, but it's just flashes of recollection and vibes. The sum total of those told me that Resident Evil 4 was a good video game that I enjoyed playing, but it left no real impression on me. Again, in large part helped by the fact that the impressionable part of my brain was in a committed relationship with another video game at the time, and that other video game did not like to share. For that reason, I've always been a Resident Evil 2 or 3 man, or more recently, a Resident Evil 7 man. The Raccoon City Police Department was a sacred place to me, literally one of my favorite video game spaces ever. The nemesis of Resident Evil 3 seared itself into my brain as one of the most terrifying things I've experienced in a game. The entire experience elevated by the omnipresent threat of him just busting through a random ass wall to coat hanging you. Resident Evil 7 immediately grabbed me for its boldness, its shift to first person perspective, its Saw-like horror set pieces, its willingness to embrace a whole new cast of characters and setting while still feeling authentically Resident Evil, with its puzzles, its weapons, its items, and its meta-narrative. 2, 3, and 7 were the experiences that really defined Resident Evil for me, and 4 sat as this other thing, this action-y game set in far-off Europe, no zombies, all sorts of goofy shit, and I only loosely remembered it. But I always knew how fans spoke about it. For many, this wasn't just the best Resident Evil game, it was the best video game, full stop. Resident Evil 4 elicits a love and enthusiasm that no other game in the series does. Even if you love Resident Evil 2 and it's your favorite Resident Evil, you probably don't love it as much as a Resident Evil 4 fan loves Resident Evil 4. That is the power of 4, and I always saw that from afar, but I never fully understood it for all the reasons I've already described. So I went into Resident Evil 4 Remake a pretty blank slate, not remembering a lot of it, a little curious as to whether or not I'd find something different this time around, but definitely expecting to enjoy it, because Capcom are just on such a tear these past few years. Some issues with the Resident Evil 3 Remake aside, Capcom just don't miss, and I knew that no matter what, I was going to have a good time with Resident Evil 4 Remake. Could not have anticipated just how much this would rock my world. I can't say, oh, I get it now, because I don't definitively know how much of what I loved about this was already in the original, because I can't remember the original well enough. I know that some of what I love about this is new, like the darker tone, the revised characterization and narrative, and Leon's expanded combat repertoire. But I know a lot of it is old, like the setting and the badassery of Leon and the action set pieces and the iconic supporting cast. The lines between new and old are very blurred for me, and so when I talk about loving this remake, I'm not really talking about it as a remake, I'm just talking about it as a game that I experienced for what feels like the very first time in 2023. And holy shit, what a game. RE4 Remake is so good that it feels like a new Metal Gear game that we're probably never gonna get. Its linear, set-piece driven escort mission structure made me reflect on The Last of Us, and I found myself often thinking, damn, I really wish The Last of Us played more like this. It absolutely recontextualized the entire way I think about the Resident Evil series, giving me keener insight into what I really loved about 2, 3, and 7, and why I didn't love Village, but I may love it more now after having experienced this. It really made me a believer in the importance of the third-person perspective for Resident Evil games, where before I genuinely thought the first-person perspective was an upgrade. It runs extraordinarily well on both PC and Steam Deck, like 60 FPS on Steam Deck, dude, what the fuck? Plus it just looks incredible no matter what platform you're playing it on. More than anything else, I arrived at the place that many others did some 2 decades ago. This is the best Resident Evil game I've played. It is the best survival horror game I've played, and it's one of the best games I've played, full stop. It took me 20 years and a remake, but yeah, I got there in the end.
Try to save one person, 100 others die.
One thing thing I distinctly remember about the original RE4 was its tone. Tone is not any one thing, by the way, it's a combination of things. It's the color palette, for example, which in the original was notably bright. It's the characters and their dialogue, which in the original was fairly campy, like a playful B-grade horror starring a 1980s action hero. It's the overall framing of the horror, which in the original was hamstrung by the limits of technology and cinematography as it relates to video games. I wonder how die-hard Resident Evil 4 fans will feel about this reimagined and notably darker tone here in the remake. Visually, the entire color palette has been reset, now many shades darker by default. Laid on top of that is modern lighting. In the near 2 decades since the original was released, the way video game spaces have been lit has been utterly transformed, and you can see that transformation firsthand here in this remake. Each space is meticulously illuminated using different lighting sources, and so many of the game's most chilling encounters happen in the pitch black darkness, like heading back into the mausoleum to take on these armored knights. Darkness is kind of the default setting for the remake, and that in and of itself does so much to transform this game's tone. It's so much more horrific as well, owing to the graphical fidelity and the way that the grotesqueness of this world can now be rendered and framed. The close-up on the Garrador the first time you see him, chained up and blind standing there, I mean, you just know that he is a second away from breaking free of those chains, and you are terrified because you can see every tiny, pained detail on his tortured flesh. There is a sequence where you play as Ashley, and it may be the scariest part of the entire game. Walking through this pitch black labyrinthine library, only a lamp to light the way, parasite-infested armored knights hunting you as you weave between them and duck under low-set shelves. It's terrifying, and this could have been really goofy. Like, these armored knights look like something out of a Disney cartoon, right? But the lighting, the sound, the level layout, the lamp mechanic, all of it combines remarkably well to create one of the game's most tense and standout moments. I definitely found myself reconsidering the horror of Los Illuminados and what they were doing here in rural Spain. The Umbrella Corp are a large multinational corporation. Evil is their MO. It's unsurprising, it's standard. They are essentially scientists doing evil science shit. It feels kind of predictable almost, and cold and distant. Here in Spain, these rural farmers, this fallen house of Salazar tricked into giving up its secrets by Sadler, it all feels so much sadder for the faint whiff of humanity that still wafts through it. I mean, the zombies of the first 3 games, there wasn't much humanity left in them by the time they were lunging at you. They were very clearly zombies at that point. But here in Spain, these farmers still look like farmers, like people, and you have to mow them down just the same. That's a more confronting and visceral type of violence to have to dish out. I had at one time considered this setting a step back for the franchise, as though zombies were the only enemies worth fighting and Umbrella was the only dance partner worthy of my time, but I don't think that anymore. In fact, I think this setting is more grim and more horrific than anything that 1, 2, or 3 delivered, and it's a shame that Capcom couldn't have found a way to carry this stuff forward properly in 5 and 6. Armed with this new perspective, I finally understood why people love Resident Evil Village as much as they do. Resident Evil Village sits at 95% overwhelmingly positive on Steam. People fucking love this game, and I really didn't, to be honest with you. I thought it was good. I recommended it in the sense that I could see the parts of it that were objectively excellent, but it just didn't do anything for me. I didn't connect with its characters, its setting, its gameplay, etc. Resident Evil Village was always positioning itself as a sort of sequel to Resident Evil 4. It's set in Europe, you're fighting these farmer people, you're going into a village and then into a castle, there's a merchant who's weird, it's very actiony, all of that. Having played through 4 Remake, I can absolutely see the straight lines that exist between this game and that, and as someone who now really loves 4 Remake, I'm interested to go back and play Village again, because it feels like almost fan service. Resident Evil 4 fans waited 16 years for a game to pick up where Resident Evil 4 left off, so I really understand now why Village got the reception it did. It felt like Capcom were going back to the style of game that many people thought was the absolute pinnacle of the series, and it did a pretty good job of recreating a lot of that magic. But not all of the magic, and just as I now better understand why people really loved Village, I also understand more deeply now why I did not. Chief among my issues was characters. I've already spoken extensively about how I thought Ethan Winters is the single worst video game character we have ever had to endure. There is a reason the zombies eat Ethan's fingers rather than his brains, because much like Homer, the zombies long ago figured out that there just wasn't anything up there.
Engage!
But Ethan is just the faceless face of the more recent game's problems with characters. The Baker family were chilling in how they embodied different aspects of horror, but they weren't characters per se, they were more plot devices. Village introduced a selection of boss enemies who were more distinctive, but outside of Lady Dimitrescu, the rest were ultimately a premise for a gameplay setting or a sequence. The lighthouse amidst all of this foggy characterization was Chris Redfield, who rocks up intermittently throughout Village and just steals every scene with his hot dad bod energy. He was a reminder of the characters this series used to have, Claire and Jill, and of course, Leon. In these postmodern times, expectations around what a character is, how they should be written, and what they should represent have evolved. Kratos is no longer a murderous sex machine, he is instead a deeply emotional dad. Ellie's murderous rampage is not killing for killing's sake, it's instead a form of grief and or therapy. Arthur Morgan is not just a cowboy, he is a doomed relic of a fading era. All of these characters are products of a much more modern approach to writing that seeks to contextualize the actions of the protagonists within a broader societal or emotional framework, shying away from the one-dimensional bravado of a bygone era. But damn if there isn't something super badass about that bygone era, and it is really nice to go back to it sometimes. This is a video game about the president's daughter getting kidnapped by some demonic cult leader, and then the president sends one dude to go in and rescue her, a former cop turned government operative. Hell, the president doesn't even chopper Leon to the location. He has to hitch a ride with some local cops to get there. Shows how much the president values his daughter. While he's there, Leon has 3 objectives. 1, rescue Ashley. 2, roundhouse kick as many farmers as possible. And 3, dish out as many one-liners as Capcom could squeeze into the game files. And I'm going to tell you right now that Leon excels at all 3.
Nighty-night. Nights.
Leon is just such a fucking badass, and even though the supporting cast here are phenomenally good, he remains at all times the star of the show. He is fearless, he is confident, he is single-minded, he's uncomplicated, and that's not a bad thing. I love complicated characters and stories, but I also love characters and stories that are just like, do this thing, like get out of the building in Dread, or fly the plane really fast in Top Gun Maverick. These stories rule, and those leading characters rule too. But just because Leon is uncomplicated does not mean he is one-dimensional. He has a past as a rookie cop scarred by the events of Raccoon City, and he thinks back on that at times, especially when he encounters Ada. He has been trained as a government operative, and that past is evident in both his expanded combat capabilities, as well as his showdowns against Crosser. He's also a really nice person who wants to reassure Ashley as she goes through this traumatic experience. He's just a great, I wish we were friends. My connection to Leon as a character, combined with how good it feels to control him, has pushed me firmly into the camp of believing that Resident Evil games are better when played in third person. Again, I used to think the first person perspective was an upgrade, more immersive, better shooting controls, but implied in the first person perspective is the idea that it's your journey through this world. That is no doubt why Ethan Winters is such a personality black hole. Capcom wanted to leave a lot of space that you could fill with your own thoughts and motivations as you controlled Ethan. That approach is ill-suited to the world of Resident Evil, I think, and the best Resident Evil games have always had a strong leading character firmly in view. You are watching their story unfold, reveling in their badassery and heroism. The first-person experiment was worthwhile, but Leon in RE4 Remake highlights just how much the narrative benefits from a third-person approach to storytelling, and that's putting aside all of the massive dividends on the gameplay side, which we'll talk about later. Leon is not the only character you'll meet throughout this adventure, though. There's also Ashley, who has been substantially updated here and is no longer just an annoying schoolgirl. She's more a young adult now. She's not at all bratty, she's just kind of scared, but she's also brave when she needs to be, and she really digs deep on multiple occasions to face her fears and help Leon. Seeing the relationship between the two of them evolve is really great. It's not flirty because Leon knows which side his bread is buttered on, and he knows better than to mess with the boss's daughter. And Ashley is just kind of overwhelmed most of the time, but they've really come to trust each other in big and small moments. It's a satisfying, professional, platonic partnership that I really enjoyed watching unfold. Ada Wong returns here to continue her own version of a professional, platonic partnership with Leon, and the voice performance here has been a big point of criticism for the remake. Here's some of the original work versus the new one.
So it is true.
True? About what?
You, working with Wesker.
I see you've been doing your homework.
Not a bad move. Very smooth.
So who are you working for this time?
Oh, Leon. You know I don't work in town.
So a lot of people say that the new Ada lacks the more playful, flirtatious vibe that the original Ada had, and yeah, she does. And they also say that she sounds kind of bored and disinterested in this remake. I actually disagree with that, and in fact, I really like her voice work here because she sounds sad. Ada here sounds like she's being forced to do the bidding of nefarious people, and she's really not into it, which she's not, that's the case. She's ground down by a machine much bigger than herself, and her sullen delivery along with her character redesign makes her seem so much more believable. If she was running around in a cocktail dress dishing out double entendres like a Bond girl, it would have worked, but it would have meant she hasn't developed as a character since the events of Resident Evil 2. Leon is so different in this game than he was in 2. He is so much more seasoned and battle-hardened. Ada has accrued her own scars in the preceding 6 years, and I think this voice performance really nails that. More broadly, the cast of foes here is so iconic. Earlier I mentioned this feels like a Metal Gear game, and this cast of mini-bosses is one of the reasons for that. Each of them have such limited screen time, but in just a few seconds they are able to leave an indelible mark on this game. Father Mendez is channeling so much Nemesis energy, and with just a few glares he's able to paralyze you with fear. Salazar is so creepy and totally what you'd imagine the endpoint of generations of aristocratic inbreeding to be, and the enunciation of his delivery is delectable in every moment, especially when he busts out the Mr. Kennedy.
Such a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance, Mr. Kennedy.
The Stranger, oh my god, this fucking guy. Talk about stealing the scene with one-liners. This guy is just crushing it in every single utterance. It is a different voice actor this time around versus the original, similar but distinctive enough to stand on its own 2 feet as a top-tier performance. You just love bumping into this guy because you're always hoping he's gonna sell you something cool, but you also hope that he's gonna say something cool.
What's that? How have we procured these curiosities? You don't want to know, mate. Came into some other bits and bobs too, mate. What you see is what I've got.
Sadler makes his presence felt at key moments throughout the story, and each time he appears you just know that shit's gonna go down. As a final boss he's somewhat underwhelming, but his character holds up overall.
You need not be afraid.
Submit your body and release yourself from fear.
The true final boss of this game, in my view, is Crosser. Man, what a dude. Badass combat vet, betrayed by his government, his worldview twisted in search of power and vengeance. The first boss encounter with him, this fucking knife battle, holy shit, this absolutely ruled. I thought there was no way in hell they could top this, but then the second time you fight him, it's like one of the best boss battles I've experienced in so long. It is deeply rooted in the history of Leon and Krauser because Krauser trained him, and now he's testing him in this big elaborate obstacle course thing, and it's full of traps, and it demands so many different combat maneuvers from you, from CQC to disarming traps to run and gun to marksmanship, and then you get dropped into these dark, tight corridors and you have to stalk your way through them with Crosser popping up to harass you, and then you have to fight Crosser in his final form, which I won't show, but goddamn, it is so epic. What a masterful showcase of characterization meets narrative, meets level design, meets boss design. It's that thing that Kojima does with all his boss battles. That is why they work as well as they do, because they aren't just combat encounters, they are pivotal character moments where the gameplay conceit is influenced by the character conceit. I love that shit, and this final face-off with Krauser was absolutely the high point of the entire game for me. The characters and boss encounters weren't the only parallels I felt to Metal Gear games. There was also the sequences and set pieces and how unashamedly cinematic and audacious they were. The Minecraft chase, the El Lago boss battle, the storming of the ramparts and the firing of the cannons, fighting 2 gigantes over a pool of smelted iron, the helicopter providing real-time air support for you as you climb to the summit. There's just so many fucking cool sequences and they never let up ever. It's just fantastic, memorable action set piece, one after the other. Except when it's not, and suddenly the game turns on a dime to be a terrifying survival horror experience. Like fighting the Garrador for the first time and then fighting 2 of them at the same time later on. Silently making your way through a room filled with regenerators, trying not to wake any of them up as they hang in body bags. Terrifying sequence playing as Ashley in the library, the Verdugo hunting you from the vents as you scramble below trying to avoid it. So many truly terror-inducing moments, and that has got to be one of the really inspired things about Resident Evil 4. All survival horror games have both horror and action to varying degrees, but I can't think of a survival horror game that has delivered so much horror and so much action, effortlessly seesawing between the 2 of them without ever losing its balance. That is the secret to this game's phenomenal pacing. It understands both action and horror perfectly, and it knows when to lean into or away from those elements, such that my 17-hour playthrough felt shorter than my 10-hour playthrough of Resident Evil Village. I didn't even notice it was that long until the end, because I was just never looking at the time, and I also was just kind of hoping that it wouldn't end. I tell you what else really helps with all of this. It's congruent right the way through. Resident Evil 7 really felt off the rails at the back end, like a complete tonal pivot. Village was specifically designed to be this theme park of horrors where you were carted between these different amusements, but they didn't feel linked enough. Here in RE4, there is one mission, one cast of characters, one tone that carries right the way through. Even though it has 3 distinct acts, the whole thing feels unmistakably connected. Even when shifting to entirely new locations with entirely new enemies, the whole thing is still possessed of that same narrative focus, tonal consistency, and core gameplay loop. There's such an electrifying vision coursing through this, powering and connecting every part of it such that no part of it feels superfluous, peripheral, inessential, or dispensable. I know the remake cut some stuff from the original game, and I don't have any thoughts on that because I don't remember the original well enough, but if they remake the remake again in another 20 years and they cut anything that I experienced here, I would be pissed. Easily the biggest change that the remake delivers is a massive expansion of the combat sandbox, but before we talk about that, I think we need to acknowledge what a fucking masterpiece this original combat sandbox was. Obviously, Resident Evil 4 was the first game in the series to offer an offset, over-the-shoulder perspective in 3D environments, where the previous games had used pre-rendered 2D environments and tank controls. That is, in and of itself, a monumental shift, and that offset perspective is the default third-person perspective for like basically every video game to this day. Then there was the transition from survival horror style combat to what we might call action survival horror. Previously, all of these games had been built on a fantasy of player disempowerment, where limited health and ammo meant you were trying to avoid combat as much as possible. You also didn't have the tools to properly crowd control enemies as they got closer to you, meaning that staying near to approaching zombies was always a bad idea. Resident Evil 4 turned all of that on its head, reworking the ammo and health economy such that resources would flow far more readily. Numerous weapons like shotguns, grenades, and flashbangs could handle swarms of foes with ease, and the addition of the roundhouse kick not only created distance but knocked over entire groups of enemies, meaning that Leon did not have to fear up close and personal encounters. The real masterstroke here though was the enemy design, both its ingenuity and its breadth. The random farmers could just keel over in a few body shots, but maybe, just maybe, their heads explode to reveal a giant gangly parasite swinging its tendrils around like a broken food processor. You wouldn't know when this was going to happen, so you had to assume it was always going to happen. Maybe one of the cultists' head would blossom into this fucked up, fleshy Venus flytrap thing. There was flying bug enemies and rabid dogs and giants and shield bros and just so many. There were so many enemy types in the original, and each of them demanded a specific style of play, from range to CQC to crowd control to AoE stun to whatever. The good news is that every single bit of that glorious combat sandbox is still here, but every single part of it has been improved in the remake. Every enemy returns, but now the animations and behaviors are so much more sophisticated owing to the technology allowing for that. Every weapon returns, though it's been tweaked to perform in slightly different ways, with the net effect being that the weapon sandbox is incredibly balanced and there are no dud weapons in the entire arsenal. The focus on action remains, only it has been greatly enhanced owing to Leon's new moveset. In addition to his roundhouse kick, Leon can now use his knife to parry attacks, both direct melee swings as well as incoming projectiles and even crossbow bolts if you can time it correctly. This parry opens up the enemy to that roundhouse kick, inviting you into that risk-reward equation such that you want to let enemies take a swing at you so you can follow up with a roundhouse that will clear some space. The way they implemented this is so perfect, and it really lays bare the failings of the Calisto Protocol. That is a game that also wanted to evolve the survival horror combat framework towards more action, and the way it wanted to do that was by getting you close to enemies. But in so doing, it totally lost its balance. You no longer feared enemies because you could just hold left or right to dodge their attacks, and there was no way to properly manage multiple enemies swarming you at once. It had the right idea about the tension inherent in close quarters combat, but it just had no idea how to execute it. Capcom fucking nailed it here with this knife parry. It's such a subtle thing, but it's totally transformative. This is not the only thing that pushes you into close quarters though. Sometimes enemies you knock down will begin spasming, indicating that they're about to transform into a more lethal variant. At that point, you need to haul ass and execute them with your knife, otherwise you're going to have a problem. That itself does a lot to move you around the battlefield rather than just letting you turtle in a corner. What about stealth? That's a thing. All new here in the remake is the ability to sneak up behind opponents and silently execute them with a knife. If you're good enough, you can skip entire sections by just stealthing past them or silently killing enemies. Then there's the sheer responsiveness and flexibility of this sandbox. If you want to stealth, you can. If you want to sit at range and pop heads, you can. If you want to be a CQC brawler, you can. If you want to ride the environment and blow up exploding barrels or hold choke points, you can. If you want to shoot the sticks of dynamites out of the hands of enemies as they're about to throw them, you can. There is so much choice for how you can approach each scenario, and true mastery of this sandbox is going to be such a sight to behold. Like, the speedruns of this are going to be fucking wild because you just have so many tools and options at your disposal at any given moment. This is another reason why it reminds me of a Metal Gear game, a mix of ranged and CQC, stealth as an option, a responsive environment you can use to your advantage, opportunities to turn the strengths of enemies against themselves. That is what Metal Gear games have always done, and Resident Evil 4 Remake is doing it here as well. What's even more astounding is the fact that every new combat sequence you step into seems to push you to your absolute limit, and you manage to get through it by the skin of your teeth every time. I played this on normal and it was not at all easy, in large part because Capcom had just so precisely calibrated the number of enemies that spawn in and how they behave and the amount of resources that they drop, such that you are always on your heels, but you just somehow managed to get through it. I couldn't believe how often I was in that exact position, just pushed and overwhelmed and feeling like I was tapped out on every weapon, no herbs left. I was definitely done for when suddenly I fire my last shot, the last enemy dies, and that combat music fades down. That feeling of relief, I became addicted to that because Capcom knew exactly how to keep me fiending. A huge X factor for why this works as well as it does is how incredible it feels to control Leon. His animations, his locomotion, his weapon switching and aim down sight speed, all of it allows you to achieve this flow state when you control him. You don't have to be conscious of his limitations because he doesn't really have any. You just imagine what you'd like him to do and he kind of just does it. Leon S. Kennedy is one of the best feeling characters I've controlled in a video game. God, he is so dreamy. The fact that this is a linear third-person escort mission where you are fighting zombie-adjacent enemies really got me thinking, why do I love this so much where I feel absolutely nothing for The Last of Us's gameplay? Most of what I have described here in RE4 Remake is also present in The Last of Us. The mix of ranged and CQC gameplay, the option to stealth or fight, environments I can make use of, excellent smooth combat animations, etc. So why do I love RE4's combat, but I don't like combat in The Last of Us? I think the difference is that The Last of Us doesn't demand you make full use of its combat sandbox. It's very optional. I see all these clips online of people playing The Last of Us like it's a fucking character action game, throwing bricks and switching weapons on the fly and doing all this cool shit, and I'm like, damn, I wish I played the game like that. When I played it, I would kind of just stealth until I fucked up, shoot a few fools, a few swings of my weapon, and that was basically it. That's how and I reckon a lot of people played The Last of Us. It gave you the option to hit this really high skill ceiling, but it never pushed you to do it. Resident Evil 4 Remake is pushing you to hit that skill ceiling every single second. From the very first showdown in the village, you are making use of every last tool in your toolkit and every last advantage the environment might afford you. The ammo economy forces you to switch weapons constantly. Enemy types force you to move in and out of close quarters. There is no part of the combat sandbox that you can leave unexplored in Resident Evil 4 Remake because you just don't have that luxury. The Last of Us never pushed me to explore the absolute limits of its combat sandbox the way that Resident Evil 4 Remake is doing in every moment. And that's, I think, the reason why I absolutely can't get enough of combat in RE4 Remake, whereas combat was just something I got through in The Last of Us, parts 1 and 2. Anyway, TLDR, combat in this game was already amazing in the original, and now it's just fucking god tier. Capcom are geniuses. I will not be taking any questions. Okay, so let's do a quick canter through a bunch of other cool shit that I haven't even spoken about yet. Firstly, this runs extraordinarily well on PC. I played on an RTX 2080 Ti, and I was able to run this at 4K 60 FPS locked. I did not have a single crash, no bugs, technically flawless. I booted it up on Steam Deck thinking there is no way a game that looks this good runs well on Steam Deck. It runs at 60 FPS on Steam Deck. 60 FPS. I don't have footage of it, but go look it up. You'll see I'm not lying. At a time when like 9 out of 10 PC ports are a disaster, Capcom delivers 60 FPS on the Steam Deck. I mean, I don't even know what to say. Secondly, this game isn't even finished, in a good way. Next week, the Mercenaries update will arrive for free. That is a timed run-based mode that's going to work really well given how fantastic the action of this title is. Later on, I'm sure we can also expect the Separate Ways DLC, a story starring Ada Wong as the lead playable character that unfolds in parallel to Leon's story, routing her through many of the same locations and connecting her with many of the villains and side characters that Leon encountered. That has already been data mined from the game files, plus it just makes too much sense. It's almost certainly on the way at some point. You know what else is on the way? A VR mode exclusive to PSVR 2. We already have a Resident Evil 4 VR based on the original game, and that's meant to be incredible. This will no doubt be even better, and it will be totally free. Think about how much work goes into creating a functional VR mode for a game, and Capcom are just giving that away to anyone who purchased the base game. Crazy. What else? I finished this once on normal mode, but there's also the hard mode and then the professional mode, and then there's New Game Plus and dozens of different challenges available, allowing you to unlock bonus content like cosmetics and new weapons, all for free, because that's how video games used to be. You used to get the cosmetics for free by playing the game. Crazy concept, I know, but there it is. For people who like to truly suck the marrow from every game they pick up, there's probably like 100 hours of content here on your way to completing every achievement, unlocking every unlockable, uncovering every secret, and try to truly master every aspect of this game's combat. It's just an absolutely extraordinary package, and to be clear, it didn't have to be this way. Just because it's a remake of one of the greatest games ever made doesn't immediately guarantee it a spot on the winner's podium. Resident Evil 3 is a good example of that, though that was by no means terrible. Warcraft 3 Reforged is a good example of that because that was a disaster. You can absolutely fuck up a remake or a remaster, so yeah, good source material helps, but Capcom did not rest on the laurels of the original here. They pushed themselves to reimagine every single inch of it while still honoring and retaining so much of the original. That is why Leon is still an alpha male action hero, but he's deeper and more nuanced and more believable now. That is why the overall skeleton of this game world is largely intact, but the presentation of each and every space has been transformed and now looks extraordinary. That is why the combat retains the same essential enemy types and weapons, but new mechanics and tweaks allow Capcom to dial the intensity of every encounter up to like 11. What a thing to have accomplished here. Look at what happens when Hollywood tries to remake or reboot films. You get this, or this. The video game industry does a much better job of this on balance, but Resident Evil 4 Remake is a new bar, delivering not only a fantastic remake, but one of the best survival horror games ever, one of the best third-person action games ever, and one of the best video games ever, full stop. I very strongly recommend Resident Evil 4 Remake. Are you still using that old fat leather wallet full of old receipts and that gym membership card you haven't used in 18 months and a suspicious ring shape pressed into the leather as a reminder of your glory years? If so, get with the times, my dude. That wallet is yesterday's news. In fact, it's probably like 10 years ago's news. Introducing the wallet of the future, Ridge Wallet. I bought a Ridge wallet a long time ago, well before they sponsored the channel, and it was just such a massive upgrade. Ridge wallets are wallets evolved. Store all of your essential cards, your cash using either the money strap or money clip, protect yourself from scammers with RFID protection, and look like a classy dude, because these things are sleek and stylish and come in a range of colors and materials, allowing you to rock whatever look works for you. Ridge don't just do wallets though. More recently, I was one of the first people to get my hands on their new key case, and that has been something that I also love, and I just can't imagine going back to a big messy clump of keys. There are other products there too, like their excellent backpack, their bolt action pens, and tons more. All of it is worth a look, and all of it is 10% off when you use offer code SKILLUP at checkout. Visit ridge.com/skillup and get 10% off store-wide. Link below in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks Ridge for sponsoring the channel for 2023, and a big thank you to you out there for watching the videos, since Ridge would not be supporting the channel if it weren't for you guys. Appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.